Well, I'm a flamenco guitarist. I'm born in the UK, half French, half English, and I've been based in Barcelona for just over 5 years. I work specifically with perceptions of the queer community within flamenco, and that has kind of led me to working with the project Flamenco Queer over the past sort of year and a half. So, yeah, that's more or less what I do. Wow, that's a good question. Well, I think a lot of my involvement in flamenco was it kind of stems from feeling like an outsider a lot of the time while I was growing up. My family was very different from other families in that, we were bilingual, we were half English, half French. We didn't really fit into the village community that we lived in. And I think as a child, I was always curious about other cultures, other different styles of music, and also given the fact that we didn't have the same pop culture references as most kids would when I was growing up, which really is like a massive gift from my parents, really, that we were brought up with classical music, jazz, reggae, world music, Cuban music, just really like any kind of music except pop. And so it was completely like a natural thing for me to be like, okay, well, what I want to do is play the guitar and I want to play flamenco because that's the kind of stuff that was playing at home. But then I just got really, really obsessed with it. And then that was sort of the beginning of my involvement in flamenco. But after having come to Spain and sort of been more involved with the flamenco community here, sort of that feeling of being an outsider kind of stayed on. There was sort of certain parts of my identity that I was exploring in other spaces, and I was particularly getting much more involved in the queer community. And I realized that I was kind of having to split my identity between my life outside of flamenco and my life in flamenco. I mean, it's quite stressful to have to constantly compartmentalize little bits of yourself and say, okay, this bit's fine for over here and this bit's fine for over there. So that's when I started wearing makeup in tablaos and started sort of experimenting more with the way I presented myself and the kind of music I was playing. And I think with Flamenco Queer, it's been like a breath of fresh air, just being able to have a space that's ours, like with our own rules, where you don't have to kind of necessarily adapt yourself to fit the space, whereas the space is much more flexible in that it adapts to you. So a lot of, I mean, you said storytelling, a lot of like the stories that we work with in Flamenco Queer come from personal experience. They come from the idea is to look at oppression through flamenco in a similar way that you know lots of different communities have done across flamenco's history. I mean, flamenco is not a style that has grown out of conservatoires and concert halls, but rather family gatherings, gitanos getting together on the street, in their places of work, amongst their family, amongst their friends, and not just gitanos, but lots of poor oppressed communities across Andalusia. A lot of people of color and a lot of communities of color have been involved in flamenco's creation, and especially working class communities. And a lot of those great figures have been queer, but just they weren't born in a social or a cultural context where that was something you could wear proudly. You know what I mean? And it's something that's so evident in their flamenco. You know, this extra level of pain, this extra level of tortured emotion is it's really evident to me. For me, that's kind of the essence of what flamenco is about. It's about being yourself, telling your story, not telling someone else's story. And I can't get up on a stage, I can't get up on a tablao and grow my hair long, because that might well make me records in the UK and make me money, but I mean it wouldn't be very honest to the people coming to see me. So with Flamenco Queer, I mean, we started out together, me and Ruben Eras. Ruben was a dancer that I met whilst working in the Palacio del Flamenco, one of the tablaos in Barcelona. And we started working together sort of a while after that. We just kind of realized we both had similar sort of points of view with regards to flamenco, and we both had a lot of curiosity to kind of, we realized we were both curious about exploring identity and looking at flamenco through a queer perspective together. So we got together and started a night in Bar La Federica, which is a bar in Poble Sec here in Barcelona, thinking that it would be a very random event, like we'd do something weird, nobody would turn up, but you know, at least we had that. And then it sold out, and they asked us to come back the next month, and then that sold out, and they asked us to come back the next month, and then suddenly we were called Flamenco Queer, and we had to create an Instagram account and decide what the hell we wanted to do with that. Because at the beginning, it had just been very much kind of like a laboratory, just like, let's go and improvise and experiment and do weird stuff. So it's kind of grown out of these kind of live sessions where we experiment, we try new things, we try new looks, new sounds, maybe play with the palos in a different way. And it's grown into something out of that. And we've recorded La Canción del Marica, a version of a poem by Lorca. It's a Sevillana, and we really wanted to use that to pay homage to Lorca and many other queer people who were killed during the Franco regime and that aren't spoken about in sort of in the history books or in the popular narratives around Franco and the Civil War. And so at the moment, we're doing everything we can to keep performing. We're working with a larger setup. We're trying to create, rather than just be the two of us as protagonists, we're trying to create a little bit of community and provide space for other LGBT flamenco artists to come and be themselves, as well as keeping in constant contact with the queer community here in Barcelona. One of our goals has always been to provide workshops for trans and non-binary folks here in Barcelona, who are often kind of excluded from flamenco schools. So community is really important. We work a lot in collaboration, and yeah, we want that to be reflected in what we do. Absolutely. I mean, if you're a flamenco guitarist, one of the ground rules is don't be a woman, you know, because apparently if you've got boobs, it's going to stop you playing the guitar properly. I don't know. There's a lot of restrictions. I guess it's something that stemmed from the commercialization of flamenco in the early 20th century, where people started to figure out what tablaos were, and you know, it started to grow out the cafes cantantes, and with the whole kind of professionalization of the art form, it became kind of convenient to put people into different boxes and roles, and it makes it easier when you're setting up a stage for a nightly show, because you know the guitarists go over here, the singers go over here, and we each have an idea of what we can do within that structure. That way, if new artists come along, it's easier to communicate because the ground rules are set. I think especially since the crisis, the financial crisis in Spain, tablaos have become kind of increasingly powerful. We've seen a lot of the high-level artists return to the tablaos, and it's become much more competitive to get in, whereas before it would be quite accessible and quite a normal integral part of somebody's development as a flamenco artist. So people have started kind of to take the rules of the tablao as the rules of flamenco in general, because it's the most kind of aspired to profession, because it provides financial stability and amongst other things. So, I mean, my answer is yes. I think that there are a lot of physical restrictions. As a guitarist, we're expected to be male. We're expected to dress in black, sit at the back of the stage. There are certain aesthetic restrictions on men, the way they cut their hair, the way they style their hair, and movement around the stage. A guitarist getting up and moving isn't so convenient. And that's fine. That's great. That's what, that's part of the history of Davlaos, and that's part of the Davlao culture. But I think we also need to provide spaces where people can look at flamenco in different ways. Especially, we need to open up accessibility for female guitarists, because that doesn't make any sense. We need to open up the flamenco guitar not just for women, but for non-binary people, trans people, and see more diversity in flamenco in general. I always hit on female guitarists because it's such an issue still, and it's frustrating that that's still an issue with the amount of incredible female talent out there. But there we go.